Have you ever witnessed the exact moment a superstar realizes they are entirely outmatched? Not by a seasoned veteran, not by a fellow Grand Slam champion, but by a rising challenger who simply refused to read the script. In the sprawling, sun-drenched stadiums of Indian Wells, the tennis world braced for what was supposed to be a routine victory for American phenom Coco Gauff. Instead, what unfolded was an absolute masterclass in tactical destruction. It was a complete dismantling of one of the sport's biggest names. And the architect of this beautiful chaos? A trailblazer from the Philippines named Alexandra Eala. What happened in the California desert didn't just shock the fans in attendance. It sent a seismic shockwave through the entire WTA Tour. But how did a heavy underdog completely embarrass a heavily favored world beater? Welcome to the dawn of a new era in women's tennis. For years, Coco Gauff has been the undisputed golden child of the sport. Her explosive speed, her defensive wizardry, and her thunderous backhand have made her a nightmare for opponents across the globe. She's a player who thrives under the brightest lights, the one who knows exactly how to turn a defensive position into a devastating winner in the blink of an eye. But against Alexandra Eala, absolutely none of that mattered. Eala stepped onto the hard court of Indian Wells not as a hopeful underdog, happy to be there, but as a predator sensing blood in the water. For the Filipina sensation, this wasn't just another match on the calendar. It was a definitive statement of intent. The tennis world has been closely watching Eala's steady, undeniable ascent for years. From her days as a junior prodigy to her gritty victories on the professional circuit, she has been a simmering force waiting for the perfect moment to boil over. When the draw revealed she would face Gauff in a round of 32, most analysts immediately wrote her off. They called it a learning experience. A good test against an elite opponent. They couldn't have been more wrong. From the very first ball, Eala didn't just compete. She dominated. She dictated the pace, commanded the baseline, and left a visibly frustrated Gauff searching for answers that simply weren't there. This story matters because it completely shatters the established hierarchy of women's tennis. We are accustomed to seeing the top players bully their way to the early rounds of prestigious tournaments like Indian Wells. We expect the heavyweight of the world to cruise until the final weekend. But Alexandra Eala's performance was a violent disruption of that natural order. For the Philippines, a nation with an incredibly passionate sports culture, Eala is carrying the weight of millions on her shoulders. Every massive forehand she hits, every unreturnable serve she blasts, echoes across an entire country. This wasn't just an impressive showing. It was a loud, undeniable arrival on the biggest stage. Furthermore, it exposed a glaring vulnerability in Coco Gauff's armor. When an opponent refuses to play into Gauff's defensive traps and instead forces the issue with suffocating, relentless aggression, even the best in the world can find themselves backed into a corner. In this documentary, we are going to break down the exact anatomy of this monumental upset. You're going to see exactly how Alexandra Eala dismantled Coco Gauff's game plan piece by piece. We will analyze the specific tactical adjustments Eala made to neutralize Gauff's devastating athleticism. We'll look at the verified numbers, the critical errors, and the pivotal turning points that shifted the momentum permanently into the Filipina's corner. More importantly, we will explore the mental warfare that took place between the lines. How does a young player maintain her composure when staring down one of the most intimidating presences on the WTA Tour? We'll uncover the strategic brilliance of Eala's camp and examine what this stunning performance means for the future of the sport. But that's only the beginning. To truly grasp the sheer magnitude of this shocker and understand why Gauff ultimately had to bow out while trailing a catastrophic 6-2, 2-0, we have to rewind to the opening set. We have to look at the very first game, where few people noticed one crucial detail that set the tone for the entire match. As the players walked to the baseline for the opening point, the atmosphere was exactly what you would expect for a primetime matchup featuring the world number 4. The crowd was buzzing, fully anticipating a showcase of Coco Gauff's trademark athleticism. Gauff stepped up to serve, tossing the ball high into the California sky. But instead of the usual sequence, a heavy serve followed by a commanding put-away, something entirely unexpected happened. Alexandra Eala didn't just block the return back into play. She stepped inside the baseline, took the ball incredibly early on a rise, and redirected it with blistering pace right at Gauff's feet. That single, aggressive return in the opening minute wasn't a lucky strike. It was a clear, calculated declaration of war. Eala was serving notice that she was not going to be pushed around by the Americans' power. To understand why this was so devastating, you have to look at the geometry of the tennis court and how Gauff typically constructs her points. The American thrives when she has time. She uses her world-class speed to track down balls deep in the corners, looping heavy topspin shots back to buy herself time to recover. Once she neutralizes a rally, she waits for a short ball to attack. It is a suffocating strategy that usually drains a fight out of her opponents by the middle of the first set. But Eala's camp clearly did their homework. They identified the exact antidote to Gauff's defensive brilliance, taking time away. By hugging the baseline and refusing to retreat, Eala essentially shrank the court. Every time Gauff hit a deep, heavy ball, Eala absorbed the pace and drove it back flat and hard. The contact point was always out in front. This tactical adjustment completely rushed Gauff's preparation, specifically on her forehand wing. It is no secret on the WTA Tour that when Gauff is put under extreme time pressure, her forehand grip can make her vulnerable to unforced errors. Eala relentlessly targeted that exact vulnerability. She peppered the forehand side, drawing short replies, and then ruthlessly stepped in to finish the points down the line. The strategy was flawless, but executing it under the immense pressure of stadium court is a completely different animal. Yet, Eala looked as cold as ice. As the first set progressed, the unthinkable began to unfold. Gauff, usually the hunter, found herself playing the role of the hunted. Eala secured an early break of serve, sending a murmur of disbelief through the stands. You could physically see the shift in body language. Gauff began looking up at her coaching box, her shoulders slumping just a fraction, her eyes searching for a solution to a puzzle she hadn't anticipated. Eala, on the other hand, walked between points with her head high, completely dialed into her game plan. The real turning point came later in that opening set, at 4-2. This is traditionally the moment where a champion of Gauff's caliber flips the switch. She typically finds an extra gear, locks down her unforced errors, and dares the underdog to close the door. Gauff tried to do exactly that. She increased the RPMs on her ground strokes, tried to push Eala off the baseline. She even attempted to throw in a few high, looping moonballs to disrupt the Filipina's rhythm. However, what happened next surprised everyone in the stadium. Eala simply did not blink. Instead of getting tight, she actually swung freer. She took those high, looping balls out of the air with swinging volleys, punishing Gauff for trying to play safe. It was a staggering display of confidence. Eala broke Gauff's serve again, effectively tearing the heart out of the Americans' first set game plan, before serving out to take the opener with a shocking 6-2 scoreline. The stadium was stunned into an eerie silence. The world number 4 had just been systematically picked apart. But the overarching question remained. Could Eala sustain this flawless level of tennis, or was this just a temporary surge? Tennis history is filled with stories of heavy underdogs playing one perfect set, only to crumble when the reality of the situation sets in. Everyone watching fully expected the American superstar to retreat to the locker room, reset her mentality, and come out breathing fire in the second set. But the narrative of this match refused to follow the traditional script. The embarrassment, and that is the only word to describe the tactical dismantling we were witnessing, was far from over. When the second set commenced, Eala immediately applied the stranglehold once again. She broke Gauff in the very first game. The Filipina's backhand was operating like a laser, finding impossible angles that left a famously quick American flat-footed. Gauff's frustration visibly boiled over. The defensive wizardry that had won her a Grand Slam was completely neutralized by a player who simply refused to miss. Eala quickly consolidated the break, racing out to a commanding 2-0 lead. The scoreline, 6-2, 2-0, painted a picture of total dominance. It wasn't just that Coco Gauff was losing. She was being thoroughly outclassed in every single department. She was being beaten at her own baseline game, outhit, and outthought by a player the general public had severely underestimated. The psychological damage of being completely disarmed on a hard court, her favorite surface, was palpable. So why did this happen? How does a player with Alexandra Eala's ranking step onto the court and completely dismantle a generational talent? To answer that, We have to look beyond the immediate tactics and dive into the deeper mechanics of both players' games. We need to examine the invisible statistics, the historical context of this specific matchup, and the profound implications this performance has for the rest of the women's tour.
To truly appreciate the magnitude of what Alexandra Eala accomplished at Indian Wells, we have to step back and examine the critical historical context between these two athletes. Because the truth is, this wasn't their first encounter. The narrative of this match wasn't just about an underdog having a good day. It was a story of profound redemption. Just 1 month prior, in February 2026, Eala and Gauff clashed at the prestigious Dubai Tennis Championships. In that match, the American superstar delivered a merciless, straightforward beatdown. Gauff completely overwhelmed the young Filipina, utilizing her immense power and court coverage to cruise to a lopsided 6-0, 6-2 victory in just over an hour. It was exactly the kind of result the tennis world expected. Gauff looked invincible, swatting away the challenger with ease, while Eala looked like a prospect who simply wasn't ready to trade blows in the elite tier of the sport. So, how does a player go from winning a mere 2 games in the Middle East to completely humiliating the world number 4 in the California desert just a few weeks later? The answer lies in the film room, the practice courts, and a brilliant tactical evolution. Eala's coaching team didn't just tell her to hit the ball harder or run faster. They crafted a surgical game plan designed to deliberately dismantle Gauff's rhythm. And the verified statistics from Indian Wells tell a fascinating, undeniable story of exactly how they executed it. Instead of trying to stubbornly match Gauff's ferocious baseline power, the 20-year-old Filipina introduced a dazzling variety of shots into her arsenal. She recognized that feeding Gauff a steady diet of heavy ground strokes was a losing battle. The most devastating weapon she deployed? The perfectly disguised drop shot. Eala repeatedly utilized brilliantly timed drop shots that dragged Gauff out of her comfortable defensive posture far behind the baseline. She forced the American to sprint forward into the net on terms she did not dictate. This tactical shift completely neutralized Gauff's ability to control points with her looping, heavy topspin. By constantly altering the pace, the depth, and the spin of the ball, Eala kept Gauff continuously guessing and relentlessly off balance. And when a world-class athlete is knocked off balance by a supposedly inferior opponent, the psychological frustration inevitably begins to seep into other critical areas of their game. For Gauff, the mounting pressure manifested in the most catastrophic way possible, the total collapse of her serve. As Eala boldly seized the momentum early in the match, holding her own serve to take a crucial 3-2 lead, the panic on the other side of the net became visible. Eala then broke the American serve to secure a 4-2 advantage, and Gauff's service motion completely unraveled. The American began rushing her toss, desperate to find free points against an opponent who was suddenly returning everything with interest. The result was a staggering 7 double faults in a match that didn't even reach the middle of the second set. Committing 7 double faults against an opponent who is already shrinking the court and playing with immense confidence is a competitive death sentence. Gauff was essentially handing out free points, heavily compounding her own misery on the scoreboard. But there is a hidden layer to this story, a sudden physical manifestation of the immense pressure unfolding on Stadium 1. As the first set began to slip away, with Gauff trailing 5-2, the physical toll of the grueling encounter reached a sudden breaking point. Gauff signaled the umpire for a lengthy medical timeout. The massive crowd watched in stunned, concerned silence as a trainer rushed onto the court to aggressively massage and manipulate the American's left arm and shoulder. The situation was dire. Gauff would later describe the terrifying sensation to the press, stating it felt exactly like a firework going off inside of my arm, and that her entire arm felt like it was on fire. The timing of this physical breakdown cannot be ignored in our analysis. While injuries are an unfortunate, unpredictable reality of professional sports, they frequently surface when a player is pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits by a relentless opponent. Eala had forced Gauff to play completely outside of her comfort zone from the very first ball, making her scramble for delicate drop shots and stretch for impossibly acute angles. Gauff valiantly soldiered on, heavily relying on her trademark fighting spirit to simply stay upright. After Eala secured the opening set 6-2, aided by yet another costly double fault from the struggling American, the trainer completely wrapped Gauff's left forearm in a desperate attempt to keep her in the tournament.
Yet, it is crucial to recognize that the physical ailments did not detract from the sheer brilliance of the Filipina's performance. Even before the medical timeout was called, Eala was already dictating the terms of engagement. She was unquestionably the better player on the court, executing a fearless, high-risk game plan with the icy composure of a player 10 years her senior. This brings us to the broader career implications of this desert showdown, which are absolutely massive for both women. For Coco Gauff, this early exit exposed a critical tactical vulnerability. It vividly highlighted what happens when her primary weapon, her elite world-class court coverage, is neutralized by a clever opponent who prioritizes variety and court geometry over raw power. Furthermore, the terrifying nature of the left arm injury raises immediate, concerning questions about her physical durability as she navigates the remainder of a grueling WTA calendar. After struggling through the opening games of the second set, Gauff eventually had to approach the net trailing 2-0, confirming she simply could not continue. It marked a highly distressing and abrupt exit for the two-time Grand Slam champion. But for Alexandra Eala, this performance is nothing short of a career revelation. At just 20 years old, she definitively proved that she possesses the rare tactical intelligence required to learn from a devastating defeat and completely rewrite the script in a high-stakes rematch. Her undeniable strengths, her exceptional court vision, her ability to absorb heavy pace, and her newfound lethal comfort in utilizing drop shots have officially put the rest of the tour on high alert. She didn't just out-hit a top player, she outsmarted her on one of the biggest stages in tennis. However, the dramatic aftermath of this stunning upset leaves us with an even bigger question. What happens now? How does the global tennis landscape recalibrate when an unheralded 20-year-old proves she can tactically dismantle and physically exhaust a heavily favored superstar? The bigger picture emerging from this desert showdown extends far beyond a single tournament bracket. When Alexandra Eala walked off Stadium 1, having secured her place in a round of 16 against Czechia's Linda Noskova, she didn't just advance in a prestigious event. She single-handedly shifted the center of gravity in the sport. For decades, the traditional powerhouses of women's tennis have resided in North America and Europe. But Eala's breakthrough signifies a monumental awakening for Southeast Asia. The Philippines has always possessed a ferociously passionate sports culture, yet they have spent years waiting for a homegrown talent to shatter the glass ceiling of professional singles tennis on the main tour. Eala is no longer just a promising prospect. She is a national icon carrying the undeniable proof that a player from Quezon City can step on the world's biggest courts and dictate the terms of engagement against the sport's absolute royalty. However, the reality of life on the WTA Tour is entirely unforgiving. Moving forward, Eala will no longer be flying under the radar. The element of surprise, the secret weapon she wielded so beautifully at Indian Wells, has officially evaporated. Every elite coach, every data analyst, and every top-tier player is now intensely studying the tape of this match. They are meticulously charting her perfectly disguised drop shots and mapping the devastating angles of her cross-court forehand. The true test of Eala's greatness will not be whether she can pull off a stunning upset, but whether she can sustain this incredibly high level of tactical brilliance now that she is a marked woman. If her post-match demeanor is any indication, she is absolutely ready for the war ahead. There was no wild, uncontrollable celebration when Gauff approached the net to shake hands. There were only respectful words for a wounded opponent and a chillingly calm acknowledgement that she belongs on this stage. Eala told the crowd she didn't want to win via retirement, but her gratitude for the moment was unshakable. That level of emotional maturity is the ultimate hallmark of a future Grand Slam contender. As for Coco Gauff, the future outlook suddenly feels highly precarious. The American superstar is now facing a profound crossroads in her young, incredibly lucrative career. The left arm injury that forced her to pull the plug in the California desert is a stark reminder of the immense physical toll her defensive, grinding style of play demands. When you rely so heavily on your ability to retrieve impossible balls and outlast your opponents in grueling baseline rallies, you are essentially walking a physical tightrope. Gauff's camp must now navigate a delicate recovery period. But more importantly, they have to address the glaring tactical blueprint that Eala just broadcasted to the entire world. Opponents now have verifiable proof that Gauff can be rushed, that she can be broken down under time pressure, and that she can be physically exhausted by a player who utilizes the geometry of the court rather than sheer pace. If the American is going to maintain her grip on the upper echelon of the rankings, she will need to evolve. She must develop a more aggressive front foot game that allows her to shorten points and protect her body from the brutal marathon matches that have defined her early career. Ultimately, this clash at Indian Wells will be remembered as a definitive turning point for both athletes. It was a masterclass in tactical execution, overcoming raw athleticism. It proved that in the modern era of women's tennis, physical power and blinding speed can be completely neutralized by high tennis IQ, relentless variety, and fearless execution. We are officially witnessing the dawn of a highly unpredictable, fiercely competitive era on the WTA Tour. The established hierarchy is no longer safe. The gap between the top five and the rest of the field is rapidly closing, and players like Alexandra Eala are leading the charge to tear down the old guard entirely. Will Eala use this monumental victory as a springboard to capture her first major title? Can Coco Gauff reinvent her tactical approach, heal her battered arm, and reclaim her status as the undisputed queen of American tennis? The answers to these questions would define the next decade of the sport. One thing is absolutely certain. The narrative of women's tennis has been permanently altered, and the next chapter is going to be incredibly ruthless. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and follow every twist and turn of this developing rivalry, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and let us know. Do you think Eala has what it takes to win a Grand Slam this year, or will Gauff bounce back stronger than ever? Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next breakdown.